Hi, everyone. My name is Braxton Montier. I'm doing an interview with UFLTV, and I'm here interviewing uh, Dwight. Do you want to introduce yourself?
For sure. Hi, I'm Dwight Hurst. I'm a psychotherapist in private practice in Davis County.
Wonderful. And this is our second interview.
It
Yeah,
is,
looking
yes. Been really looking forward to it. It was a lot of fun to come on last time.
wonderful, wonderful. Well, again, I have some questions for you. So let's hop right in. The last time you were here, we talked about parent and child alienation dynamics. Since then, you've reorganized your court-ordered services. What's changed with them, or has the landscape changed, and why now?
hmm Well, I noticed that I was just kind of, I don't know, just doing more and more of different types of court ordered. I have a history of working both with family relationships, family
Mhm.
systems therapy, couples therapy, both for in order to repair relationships, but also post-divorce communication or people who are going through a divorce, all different kinds, as well as parent-child reunification and kind of trying to work through parent-child relationships. I also work a lot with substance abuse and criminal charge related things with evaluations and treatment for those types of things. Well, I'm a member of the local Utah AFCC, which is the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts. So I kind of reorganized everything. I did on my website, bringing everything kind of under one umbrella and kind of making that known because it's something that I'm just seeing more of in both the civil and criminal areas.
Yeah, you might as well adjust to the landscape if that's what you're getting. So awesome. Um, when Utah judges order co-parenting therapy or reunification therapy, what do you think that they're ordering? You said that, this stuff is coming up more and more. And, I've seen other cases where they go, oh, you're going to go to reunification therapy. But, is that what do you think the judges are actually thinking when they say you need to go to reunification therapy or co-parenting therapy?
Well, it's you've got several different levels of what people think, right? You've got the authorities, you got a magistrate or a judge usually who's doing
Mhm.
that, or sometimes it's also an agreement that's reached through mediation or just attorneys saying, "Hey, I think you should do this." So I think when it's ordered by the court, I think what they're usually doing is they're usually trying to say, look, y'all aren't communicating well. There's a big problem. You need to work this out because it's not enough to just work it out here in the courtroom or even having just your attorneys talk to each other, particularly with
Yeah.
co-parenting, because the attorneys are certainly not going to parent your children. Even if you have a guardian ad litem, that's not their job either. And so trying to co-parent effectively, um, and then also reunification. Generally speaking, the difference there is the co-parenting. You're talking to parents or former partners, former spouses, whoever they are, of the kids. Sometimes step parents or other caregivers. I've had grandparents, or just family members who. I've even had sometimes roommates who have participated, who have been invited in, or close friends who are very involved in parenting, if it's determined by the parents to be necessary.
If
And
that's their dynamic,
if
like
that's
maybe
right, if they play
yeah.
exactly, it might be the people who basically are the adults parenting the child. And if so, it's rare, but sometimes it's a non-family member, but usually it's someone that is a partner or a spouse or sometimes parent of the parents. And then with reunification, typically we're talking about when there has been either a relationship rift or sometimes simply a passage of time that has gone by. If someone, say, renegotiated, or I've also known people who, even if they were on fairly good terms with their ex, they did not have a lot of parent child one on one time because of health reasons or sometimes incarceration or sometimes they moved or had a job somewhere, whatever, and there isn't necessarily a rift, but they do need to, in a healthy way, help their child get used to seeing them. And also, they have stress often about parenting a child they have not been able to parent for a certain amount of time. So it's not always fighting, but generally speaking, there's some kind of friction in the relationship of one kind or another.
Okay. And what do the courts actually get when they order these kinds of therapies?
Yes.
They think that they're going to, we'll order this, everything will be fixed, and you guys will fix whatever problems are stopping the normal divorce process from going.
Well, here's the interesting thing that I see. So, like, once again, you've got the layers, and I think, we're
Hmm.
talking about here's what the court wants to see, and then the things I was talking about is kind of the therapist's perspective as well. I think one important thing in between those two is the parents' expectations as well, right? So, when they
Yeah.
come in, and to address mainly your question is what is the court going to receive? Well, typically, what they're going to receive, the parents and the court and the lawyers and everybody are going to receive some type of a documentation or a report that comes after a process. Now, there may be a couple different reports depending on when there are reviews that you have to show evidence. They might come in and say, the therapist has written a treatment summary saying that here's the dates they've come in and what's happened so far. Or there might even be something to where when we feel like we've accomplished the goals, here's a report that's going to come in that says, hey, they're working on this. I think they're also hoping to see a actual behavioral change and functional change in the way that things are working.
Yeah.
That's everybody's real priority, is to see it work that way. But you are going to see that, and I think one of the things that might be different is that if people think, for example, kid's not going with the other parent when they're supposed to and they have a rift, then that should be fixed or repaired. But that's not necessarily going to happen. What's going to happen is there will be a report that is clear and straightforward about here's what we did. You cannot force a child to feel better. You cannot force the parent to engage in a mature way. And so basically one of the things that I think is going to link through a lot of these things we're looking at is clarity, because clarity of reporting what is going on, if that makes some sense, is that that's really what we're looking for, is to identify what's going on, hopefully impact it in a healthy, positive way. But the main thing is to be able to look at it in an honest and unbiased way of here's what happened. Hopefully and usually some improvement is made and people work hard and they try to be, intentional, but you can't force people to communicate better. So,
Yeah, you can't wrap a ratchet strap around them and go, "All right, kids, we're gonna make you love your mom or your dad or parent."
right.
You you can't do that, and sometimes it kind of feels like that's what the courts want. It's kind of what they want to
Well,
use therapy for.
it absolutely, yeah, it can fall into that trap. And I mean, from the
Mhm.
court's perspective, they're looking to, and I don't think this is unhealthy, but they are looking to offload some of the things that they cannot impact themselves. They can say, and some of the time they're also trying to get information about,
Mhm.
is this person, is everyone trying to be compliant? Is everyone trying to follow? Because one of the things that is important, whether it's parental communication or parent-child relationships, when people come in, one of the traps they can fall into is to think this is going to end up in changing the court order or changing and getting some kind of a recommendation that's going to suggest here's how things are going. Now, from a secondary perspective, if someone's working on a relationship and I'm able to report to everyone that, yeah, they've really worked and they and the kids seem to be getting along better. Now, their lawyer or they might use that to request, and hopefully collaboratively would be ideal with the other parent, and say, how about we evaluate having some more time now that Junior is feeling safe and comfortable? Or if they are improving communication or they're getting healthier, same thing. They may go back to the court and request that either through mediation, through just communication, or if there's still a disagreement, they may utilize that to go to court. But I don't make a recommendation on custody or reevaluation of a divorce decree. That's also very important because some people think, and I don't think this is the courts so much because they know what they mean when they say things like a custody evaluation is very different. See, I don't do
Yeah.
those. Generally speaking, people who do those, that's a highly specialized, and I will say it's a longer, more invasive, and also very expensive process. And
Yeah,
so
the
people
ones
need to
that
be
I've
careful not
seen,
to think they're going to get that. Yeah.
yeah, the ones that I've seen, they've taken like a year or more, sometimes up to two, and the parents can end up spending like $10,000, and just and a lot of the time they're not really happy with what they get. So
Yeah, generally at least one person isn't. If you think
yeah,
about it, that's a whole thing. when you go in for that. And yeah, the thing is that if you do have like an individual therapist or someone who's working with the family, either one, mo- most, and I don't know anyone. I have heard stories of therapists themselves falling into this trap, but most of us know that number one, we don't have the qualification. A custody evaluator is going to interview both people. They're going to go visit homes. They're going to interview family and caregivers. They're going to get medical records. They're going to do all these different evaluative things so they can intelligently say, I have an idea of what the child's life is like. And that's where I can't do that. Even if I've met with the child, I've met with the parent or both parents, I can't, number one, I can't intelligently and ethically and honestly say I know what their home life is like. Not really.
Yeah.
And I also know that any judge or authority is going to also not take that seriously because either side is going to say, who's this guy? He's never
Yeah.
been in the house. He's never, and in some cases, if they're doing co-parent, I might not have ever even met the kid. A lot of times I will, but not always. So,
Well, yeah. No, I mean, sometimes it might just be a parent who is like, "Hey, I kind of need to work on myself a little bit to get back and spend time with my kid."
and that's
So,
absolutely true. That
yeah,
sometimes is an agreement that's made or ordered by the court. Or there are people who just, believe it or not, there are people out here who we want to improve ourselves, even if I don't have to, or something,
yeah,
right? Who come in and say, "Hey, I am worried about. I haven't, I got more time with my kids, and I need to sort of brush up on how do I want to approach them in a way that feels good." Absolutely.
yeah, absolutely. And for the kind of people who aren't willing to come to therapy and go, you know what, I need something to work on. Sometimes they might just be ordered to show up. What does a normal kind of therapy session look
Mhm.
like? What can somebody who has never been to therapy kind of expect if, maybe they're court ordered or hey, maybe they found it within themselves to go, hey, maybe I think I need something. I need something to help me work on something. How
Yeah.
what does that look like for them?
Well, typically what will happen is you come in and just like for any therapy session or therapy process, any medical service really, one of the first things you're doing is evaluating the situation. When I meet with someone, regardless of what they tell me, here's what I'm supposed to get, here's what this. So it's going to be a similar process of meeting and evaluating and talking about what are the specific goals. For a therapist, it is helpful to, if there is a court order, it's kind of helpful to see that because there have been times where someone will come in and say, here's this court order. It says I got to do a thing. And it'll say, it might be very vague. It might just say, get some therapy. It might say, get a therapy from someone who's AFCC or someone
Yeah,
who has some other specific training. And so if someone comes in, there have been a couple times where I've looked at the court order and been able to say, the things you and I will do together won't meet this. So let's say if it says get a custody evaluation, and
yeah,
some people do, and I understand. Go and say, hey, what's the boy? If my insurance will pay me for some individual counseling, and I'll go in and talk to this guy, and he can do this for me. That's way better than spending somewhere like $5,000 to $10,000 to $15,000. And it's like, yeah, I understand, but once again, that's a big example of one that I am not going to
yeah,
help.
and that's not always feasible for people.
No, no,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and that's the thing. And trying to that's where doing some kind of this sort of just standard intervention to see if you can impact the situation can sometimes save people from having to do that. Because if I can
yeah,
communicate better with an ex or whatever, then we might not need that just because we can talk and work things
yeah,
out. So yeah, that's that. So you're going to get an evaluation, and basically, some things are going to depend on what the goals are that you want to set up. So if someone comes in and they say, we want to get better at talking to each other, or we've been ordered to do this, I have noticed that it is the usual way is a lot of times one of them will contact me first and say, can I set something up? I usually try to get some kind of contact with in a co-parenting situation with both individuals. And one of the first things I'll try to measure is should we just dive into the three of us sitting in a room together or getting on a Zoom call together and talking, and how comfortable does everybody feel? Because why not hit the ground sort of running? But oftentimes people are not at a point where they're even willing or able to do that in a productive way. And so it might be an individual meeting with each of them first to try to talk. And in some cases, In some cases, a lot of the meetings might be individual, and I'm sort of passing sort of goals or requests of what they want to talk about. So you see a little bit where this can take on, there's a little bit of mediator skill, even though we're looking at communication skills, not making decisions or negotiations that way, but to say, so there's a little crossover there of setting up how are we going to talk to each other. That's very big, because if you just make assumptions and you don't have a history, then you're liable to, it's going to be counterproductive.
Yeah. What are some of the like common conflicts, or what are the most common conflicts that kind of get people ordered to go to co-parenting or reunification therapy? Is it like a communication thing? Is one party trying to exercise too much control? Is it like an allegation of an alienation and just everybody's so keyed up about it, or just high conflict personalities? What do you normally see?
Mm-hmm. It's really a little bit of all of the above that you do get
Yeah.
into. I would say probably the most common unifying thing is hurt feelings that are lingering from the situations that may have led to the breakup. If there was a
Hmm.
breakup, I work with a lot of people who never really were in a relationship as well, and
Yeah.
that leads to that one. You also see where people maybe never really knew each other well enough to communicate well. And so, but most commonly there is some amount of hurt feelings, and that's where one of the important goals kind of comes in, is that I like to check and make sure people have, if possible, their own therapist that they're processing things with. Because if I'm doing co-parenting work, it's one of those things where there's a balance between feelings and functionality, because
Yeah.
what I'm trying to help is, right, the relationship to become functional and for people to be able to communicate in safe and clear ways within the confines of the agreement they already have, if that makes sense. So if they come in and
Yeah.
say, I want more time, then it's like, well, that might be more of a lawyer discussion, right? If it's like,
Yeah.
if you can safely discuss it in, would it come up in therapy? It might, if it's on the table to talk and we're able to talk about it calmly. But usually we don't start with things like that. We usually are just trying to say, can we be in a room and talk? And I always like to say, let's make it very clear, what is the current legal divorce decree arrangement? We're
Hmm.
mostly going to be talking about how to regulate emotions and communicate clearly enough to be able to follow through on that. And frankly, sometimes that means taking the beefs and the hurt feelings that we have with each other and going and processing that somewhere else. Which is not, we think in therapy it might be, but it's not couples therapy. We don't come in and
Yeah.
say, here's these three things that really split us up and I want closure. It's like, actually, for this purpose, it might be better to say, to surrender the idea and accept that I'm either not going to get closure from my ex, or I gotta, we might have to talk about that somewhere else. But to have like a therapist and a support system and say, I'm going to take that over here. And for the purpose of functional co parenting, there might just be some fights we need to stop having, which
Well,
is
yeah,
often a healthy part of
especially
breaking up. Yeah.
especially in like a divorce or like a parent time custody kind of situation, trying to get those orders. That process is such a volatile and kind of emotional process, especially like even though Utah's a no fault state, especially if you like if there is fault that happened, like maybe one spouse cheated on another, or that there's some sort of neglect or abuse that went on, that's definitely got to put a finger on the scales of all of those conversations.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
so that's where kind of trying to find that, and trying not to also fall into the trap of relitigating that, because I
Yeah.
have worked with clients who they may have had an allegation of some kind or another that was settled, and I've talked to people who this was maybe over a decade ago, and they're
Yeah.
still hoping that maybe this new person, this therapist, is going to listen to me and is going to change and enforce something that was already investigated or was already this or already that. And I can't know, of course, what happened, but
Yeah.
I can only evaluate kind of what's going on currently and presently. And I know this from lawyers that I work with too, that say that, they have some clients. Sometimes it's like, I really am focused on this thing that frankly is over. And
Yeah.
I need to find a way to, if I'm worried about safety now, I need to monitor for safety and those kinds of things. And so, not trying not to fall into the trap of kind of trying to, I would say, metaphorically or literally relitigate something that's already been settled. and just say, how can we in a healthy way communicate? Now, that is to say, the feeling of I need to process and find emotional closure is still very, very important. But if
Yeah.
you have been trying to get that from a certain person and you're not getting it from that former partner, you're not likely to. And also, you need to get that. That's where I really encourage people to have a therapist that they're going to, that the co parenting therapist is really not going to likely be your personal therapist, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Has there ever been a time where like co-parenting just won't work on these people? Like they're not ready, or like you're like, oh, co-parenting would be such a good thing for these people, but they're holding too tight onto X, Y, or Z, you know?
Yes, I think absolutely there are several reasons. The most common reason, if we take out some of the extremes, and I'll mention those in a second, but if we put some of the extremes off to the side, the most common is because somebody won't really participate, or and that's oftentimes it's a willingness issue. Sometimes that might touch on an ability issue, and so you
Hmm.
might end up with a referral that just says the emotional regulation's not there. And as much as we've tried to work together, this person probably needs to learn how to regulate their emotions. Maybe they need medical intervention or something if it's a mood disorder, that something like that. And they need to be able to come in stable. If it's I never want to be like sort of like having a space for people to come in and hurt each other, even just verbally, right? To come in and just lambast the other. And it's like, if that
Yeah.
can't be regulated, we're probably not really ready. Some of the extremes are if there is an extreme history, if there was domestic violence, if there's an ongoing investigation of abuse
Mhm.
of the child, things like that. Parental co-parenting communication is probably premature at that point. And
Yeah.
also, with when there has been a real power differential of abuse where one partner was really controlling and abusing another, if it was enough and there's never been any treatment or reconciliation or any work before, then that's often not, that would not be safe, if that makes sense. So
Yeah,
there's
you don't want somebody who is like currently under the orders of a protective order that's fresh out of the printer to be in a room with somebody that that needs to be protected from them, you know?
exactly. And that's where in those cases I will say, if there is that history to where the person's like, I literally don't feel safe, maybe even physically safe because of what's happened before, that kind of
Yeah.
thing, we can structure things. And I've known people that have had maybe a court, even a protective order where they can't be in the same place at the same time. Sometimes they can get an exception to that in order to participate. Oftentimes, an online kind of a thing is better because we're not in the same building. But I've also known people who have staggered arrival times, who have, coordinated whether or not they're going to be in the parking lot at the same time. And sometimes that's just because they argue in the parking lot, those kinds of things. So online can be helpful, or that might be one of those times where they might never come in to a session online or in person together. And I might just talk to one and say, what do you hope for to hear from the other person? What do you hope for? Hey, this is what they want. And then looking at what are some of the emotional and practical obstacles to being able to just say, yeah, can I just say, drop off pickup time, let's not talk to each other? Or let's have it in this location. And that way we don't have to worry about someone yelling at each other during this, or something along those lines. That's just a small example.
Has there ever been a time where you've seen you've kind of been informed of some sort of family dynamic, and and it's just kind of struck you that maybe these people don't really need therapy. They just need clear enforcement of the rules, just clear rules.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe their orders are kind of ambiguous, and so one person does one thing and they go, "Hey, well, you can't do that," and it just kind of, because it's not clear, generates this friction that doesn't really need to be there.
Yes, definitely. I've seen that. And I see that sometimes when I work with individual clients where there might be something that becomes a sticking point. And a lot of that is one thing that I would definitely encourage people to look at and say, if there is something that is a repeated thing that's coming up that is not specified. There are a lot of divorce decrees that do not specify certain things, and they probably should.
Yeah.
And then I think you kind of have two ways to go with that. If both parties recognize that something's not working, and it's not specified in the divorce decree or the whatever legal arrangement and agreement they have. If that's not specified, then it sometimes is necessary to sort of go back, mediate, get that specified, whatever. But if they both agree it's not working, they can, and this is of course possible for human beings. We can say, you know what, we wish we would have specified. Do we have agreement on what would work better? And can we just do that? And a lot of
Yeah.
times people are able to do that where it really becomes just a negotiation. The thing I mentioned a second ago, let's say pick up and drop offs. There's a lot of
Yeah.
friction around those things sometimes. And so sometimes it can be as simple as just tweaking and saying, when we do it this way, we have a conflict every time.
Yeah.
So could we do it in a different way? And if both people are like, yeah, I'm sick of the conflict, let's meet, at this parking lot around the corner from your house because I don't like whoever you live with or something, or it's whatever it is,
Yeah.
or drop off at the curb. I mean, as simple as those kinds of things sound, many times those are not specified because people just assume we'll figure that out, and
Yeah.
and it might lead to a conflict. So either trying to tighten it up officially, or always I think it's good to look for the opportunity to say, oh, we could just tweak it and we both are happier. Then we
Yeah.
probably just do that then. Yeah.
Well, yeah, if it's like, hey, look, something has changed, and now the way that we have this ordered is, really hard on me or really hard on you. Is there a way that we can just kind of bridge this gap so that we don't have to fight, or, it doesn't have to be such an imposition on each one of us? That seems like a really reasonable way to go about it, you
And
know?
sometimes, yeah, when I've worked with people, and not to overuse this one example, but this is one thing that once people have everything else ironed out, sometimes this still becomes a thing, right? Is like, oh, take for example the person who says, I live in a very timely manner, and I have this window of I think when the drop off's going to happen, but my the other parent does not necessarily get there on time. And we thought about this and thought
Mhm.
about this and thought about this. And to try something like, well, can I just reframe that and say, I'm going to make myself, in on my mind and the timely person, am I going to say, I'll just expect between, within this 45-minute window or hour window. That's when I've scheduled to just be here. Hopefully it's at their house if that's happening. They're not sitting by the curb. And then can the other person say, how tight of a window can I commit to? And just kind of trying to say, can we compromise in a way that isn't, you better be here at this time. Well, you better loosen up, kind of a thing to where,
Yeah.
and, simply that's kind of an example of just a compromise. But the difference with that from mediation to counseling is a counselor can help to try to say, that's not necessarily just you both giving up what you want. What's the old joke about compromise is two people agreeing to not get what either one wants. But
Yeah.
in an emotional communication way, it's sort of trying to reframe and say, can I accept this in a way that won't set me up to become dysregulated emotionally? So you can see where
Yeah.
there's kind of a difference between those two. If we're banging our
Yeah.
head against the wall and then learning about how maybe I need to reinterpret where the wall is, that's more therapy, right?
Yeah. It may not be a wall at all. Do
Exactly.
you
The
ever get
wall
the
might not even be there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you ever get
Or
the sense
not
that
need to be.
sometimes it's just one person wants to be right and just wants the other person to admit, like, yeah, just admit that you're late to me and we can move on? Something like that.
It does. It does happen, sure. And that's something that is nice because that will come through in a therapy setting. That's something that someone in my role can ask and say, what are you looking for? What is your goal of what you want to
Yeah.
get out of this? Now, there's that line. Do you have someone who's like, I would like to be told, or do I want to be validated? Or do I want to win? And that's where we would get into the weeds of what's the goal, right? And it's
Yeah.
like, if the goal is I'd like to be validated and just admit that, yeah, sometimes you're late and that annoys me because, hey, we were together for however long. And
Yeah.
yeah, I know, but you also know me, I'm going to be sometimes. Okay, that, we'll feel validated in a way or whatever specifics. And then on the other hand, saying like, well, my goal is you need to admit it and never be late again. And then all of a sudden we're probably trying to replay a dynamic that led to the breakup in the first place instead of saying, hey, we may not have to have that fight anymore. If you're
Yeah.
looking to win, you probably need to reinterpret your goal, not just tweak the communication. You probably need to say, if I'm going to, if I'm going to try to win, and I believe the only way is for them to lose something, it's that win-loss scenario. And I also always tell people when I'm working with them, try not to overinvest in winning, but also don't invest in whether or not you think that your partner or ex-partner thinks they won. In other words, if you think, oh, they think they got one over on me, huh? Look and say, well, if it's not really hurting anybody, that's not really, I don't have to read their mind. I don't have to police their thoughts. And if I'm not actually losing anything, then don't pick that fight. Well,
Well,
just don't.
if you're not really losing anything, did you actually lose?
Right, exactly. And then people get worried about, oh, well, you think you won, huh? I got to make sure you didn't. And it's like, no, no, that's once again an example of a fight that we probably will be happier not having anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so let's change gears a little bit and get into some harder stuff a little bit.
Sure.
So in reunification therapy, it's often ordered when a child is kind of refusing parent
Yes.
time or refusing contact. How do you determine whether or not that's alienation or estrangement or just justified? You know, maybe the kid just is like, look, I know what you did. I don't want anything to do with you.
Yeah.
Like, how do you kind of read that situation to determine, which one of those categories is it?
hmm it's an ongoing kind of struggle. I think number one, you have to be open to ongoing evaluation of that type of thing,
Yeah.
to kind of be open-minded to say, I don't, and I might never actually know the full realities of some of those things, but I can monitor how people are acting and feeling and what I can observe. And so the way practically to go about that is that you want to spend time talking to people individually in that scenario. Ideally, spending some time talking to both parents individually. And
Mm.
also, I think it's imperative that you have to communicate with the child and or the child's therapist, which is good for them to have again as well, because then you have someone who's looking out for them, that isn't like, oh, well, I know you're trying to get me to go see my parent,
Yeah.
and so I'm going to be very guarded, which is normal, because if what I say is might help determine something and someone's going to use it,
Yeah.
and especially for a kid who doesn't necessarily see the difference between me and a judge and a court and a lawyer, it's just
Well,
you're
yeah.
another person, another adult they're going to make me talk to.
Yeah.
So coordination and release with the child's therapist is helpful, because then I could get insights into what they're feeling safe talking about. And you got to structure that so the child knows it's going on. It's not a secret, you know. But then also, and I happen to have I feel advantage of I've worked with kids a lot in my career. So I'm usually pretty
Hmm.
good at having a rapport with kids and letting them know up front. I think being honest with everybody that I cannot, I'm not going to try to force anybody to do anything. They all need to decide how to balance that. So by talking to the kid, you get a feel for if they're just, if do they have a grudge? Are they open to kind of working this through? Have they had, if there has been some type of severe history of abuse, for example, particularly if there's been sexual abuse, you need to make sure to evaluate what type of thing. Are we just looking for reunification, like relationship repair? Or are we looking at reunification following abuse? That's a very specific other track.
Yeah.
And
Like,
that's a lot of individual work and
yeah.
communication between two therapists, sending amends messages and having the victim evaluate if they accept that or not. And just that's a whole thing that you are not going to just say, hey, come on in here, let's get over this, you know?
Yeah, it's a completely different sport. It's like, hey, my dad was just gone for a while and then came back, as opposed to my dad savagely beat me several times and I don't know how to
Absolutely.
deal with that. Like, those are completely different sports, not just ball games, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, because then to know what you're looking for, I would say the more common is just that there's a rift in the relationship. And with
Hmm.
that, I think that one of the major things is to try to be driven by what the child's asking for. That's actually in a bit, you mentioned alienation. If the
Hmm.
child is asking for, I would like this, and the parent who they're having that alienation with is willing to say, I'm going to try to meet your needs, what you asked me for. And if it starts to get
Hmm.
better, then to a certain extent, as long as it doesn't not taken some kind of a dive, then it's working. If that makes
Yeah.
sense. If it is working, then that, because the question comes in, as I think this came up when we talked last time, alienation is, me and my kid are not getting along. alienation as an action that's being done by the other person is
Yes.
alienating a child from the other parent by saying they suck or whatever,
Yeah.
right?
What kind of red flags do you look for to kind of see the phantom finger on the scale going like, yeah, your dad really doesn't love you, or that kind of stuff.
Well, one of the first ones, believe it or not, is the kid will say, the kid will tell you what's being said. Whether it bothers them or whether they agree with it, they will usually say, yeah, my one parent has told me over and over that they are bad because of this and this and this. Um, Once again, there's the extreme over here where if they have been abused, I don't think any parent should lie to their child and say, well, it's okay and I can't say anything. Obviously there's honesty about that, and so you're kind of trying to look at that. The red flag for
Yeah.
it being inappropriate would be if the child is telling me that they feel like they have to act that way around the parent that they're with most of the time because they get mad at me if I don't, if I'm not on their side.
Yeah,
And
if they find out I actually love dad more than they think, like then
exactly.
I get punished for that, or
Yeah.
you know.
And so then looking at that and saying, and then of course, when I'm talking individually to parents, there's always little red flags there you can see if someone is doing that in my office and just telling me over and over again how the person's terrible. Then
Hmm.
I have to kind of evaluate, like, are they coming to me with that hurt victim worried about my kid kind of thing, or which is, you mentioned the other category, which is justification, right?
So
And
sometimes the kid learns the truth and then goes, you know what, Dad, I really don't like that you murdered somebody. I would just
well,
prefer not to hang out with you. And
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes it's justified.
And then also to say, that's the red flags I see in the other one, the one who is asking or trying to reconcile, is are they trying to reconcile? And that becomes pretty apparent, actually, for at least for me, it always has. Generally speaking, it's pretty apparent because in session they will attack the other parent a lot. They will minimize their own contributions. Because I mean, frankly, if you're going through a thing and you haven't seen your kid for several years, or something
Yeah,
like that, some major amount of time, there was
yeah,
some problem there. And I mean, there are cases out there, sure, where one person is a Batman villain and level of just they're bad and they stole all this and
hmm,
whatever. That happens, but typically speaking, it's also like, well, do they own any of that process to say, well, I
yeah,
was unhealthy and it took me a while to get healthy, even that, or to say, I was intimidated by the other person and I didn't fight, and I just signed stuff just to get it over with. Now, is that your fault or not your fault? I don't know, but you do have, but do they acknowledge ownership of that? That I gave
yeah,
up because I was scared or something? And so that's always something that's important. And then just kind of seeing how it all matches together as far as what you're seeing happen. If the biggest sign that it is a justified low to no contact is when the child is exhibiting worse mental health when they have more exposure, because that's a big sign. It's like, boy, yeah, the one parent said, all right, look, you are going to go this weekend or you're grounded because you have no, you're going or something like that. And then they go and then they
but
start to
yeah,
deteriorate mental health wise and things. It's like, whoa, hold on. What are we doing there? So you have to kind of look at this, because the whole thing really isn't, at that case, it's really what you're really looking is to do right by the kid, and that's the main
yeah.
thing. Yeah,
Well, and sometimes it's not practical. Like maybe you're like a 5 foot woman, and your son, who's 16, is now brushing 6 feet. He's on the football team. You can't force
exactly.
that kid into a car to go spend time with his dad, who's twice his size. Like
Right.
th-
No,
sometimes
no,
it's just not
just not
physically
going to happen.
practical. Yeah,
And
and
also
you
there,
can ground him, but like,
well,
what is
absolutely,
that gonna
and
do?
and that isn't something, by the way, that I would recommend if someone asked my opinion of, like, should I
Yeah,
ground my kid for not going? Typically speaking, if the kid really doesn't want to go, they do have a reason. And even if
yeah,
you're like, I don't agree with their reason, if we're not willing to engage with that reason at all, then that is at best inflexible rigidity that's going to disappoint you, and at worst
hmm,
sign of controlling or abusive mentality to say, no, I don't care why they feel this way, they shouldn't. That's a controlling thing to do. You know what I mean? And frankly, also when you see, and I know that there's no official, as far as I understand, you'd know more than me about this. There's not an official age to where the courts are like, you're this age, you make all your own decisions now. But I do know that it seems like as they get older into teenager, on the one hand, the court's more likely to say, kind of listen or whatever. And if they're 16 plus, frankly, if you want to really go and fight at court or try to really push, I mean, it's only going to be a little bit of time anyway before they are officially an adult, and they are only going to reach out to you when they want to anyway. So focusing on the relationship is really the main thing.
Yeah, a big thing about that is there is like the misconception that when you're 14, you can choose which house you go to. That's not really true. As kids age, they become more competent witnesses. But there isn't really like really like a floor for how incompetent a witness they can be. So like, I mean, you can bring an 8-year-old and put them on the stand and say, "Where did the bad man touch you?" They do that in criminal cases all the time.
Sure.
So they don't necessarily want to do that in a divorce case. But I mean, if you want to ask the kid, like, "Hey, what kind, who takes you to soccer practice? Who normally takes you to school? What kind of lunch does your dad or your mom pack you when you're with them?" Like, they're perfectly competent to answer those kinds of questions. I mean, you shouldn't be, so blunt to be like, does your dad beat you when he's over there? It's like
How much
that's
does
not.
your dad beat you? Right, exactly. Yeah.
Would you say 2 or 3 hits? Like that,
How
you should.
terrible of a lunch does your parent give you? Right, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, you shouldn't do stuff like that. But I mean, you can kind of get an idea, and like you could even like question them or depose them, like, and agree on questions or however that wants to work out.
Mhm.
If it's such a big issue that like, oh, the kids are saying this and the kids are saying that, ask them.
Yeah,
They, I mean, they're
absolutely. And
competent.
I really go by that too. And I think one of the things is when you're doing, let's say, co-parenting and you're trying to help establish communication, you do want to keep a balance there of being
Mhm.
able to have both people have a voice, and you're trying not to go on one or the other. From my perspective, if I'm working on the like kind of parent reunification type of thing, I'm always going to be more biased towards protecting the child. And if that makes sense, I mean, that's how I
Yeah.
approach it. Is it's like I try just am very sensitive to the idea of trying to push a child into a dangerous or unhealthy situation, and at that point, too, if they really are showing, and this is really,
Hmm.
that's where I'll go back to maybe the parent and just say who I'm going to be talking with anyway, to make sure that they're facilitating a healthy environment, and say, this isn't working because they are, whether you like it or not, really, really either scared or intimidated or resentful,
Hmm.
and you're going to need to find some smaller little ways to work on the relationship and show it and show the behavior, if we're to believe, if they are to start to believe that they want to have anything to do with you. And frankly, also, when kids get to be a certain age, the legality isn't as important, because if you say
Yeah.
a kid who's got a driver's license, who's got relationships and friendships and a job and extracurricular activities, frankly,
Hmm.
most of us, if our kids are that old or older anyway, we don't see them as near as much as we used to anyway, right? And
Yeah.
so if they don't want to
Eh,
come over, they're going to go hang out with a friend this weekend, even if I'm with you this weekend.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
exactly like you said. Like the moment that kid's like 16, you can court order them to come and sleep at your house. But
sure.
like they're gonna have their job, their extracurricular activities. You may not even get to really see them. If you
Yeah.
work like a swing shift and you're like, well, the court order says you're gonna be at my house. It's like, all right, yeah, I'm at your house. Good job, Dad. You got me. And
Sure.
then a year and a half later, you never see that kid again
Hmm.
because you can't force him to anymore.
Yeah. Now, I will say, once again, going back to, I think, the most common, I always qualify it with the extremes because I think it's important to know
Mhm.
they exist. The most common, where there is just a bit of a rift, that's where I
Mhm.
actually see a lot of those in under that group. A lot of parents are like, yeah, either I've goofed or messed up in one way or another, or I don't really think I have that badly, but either way, my kid needs to feel better. And so I'm
Mhm.
willing to jump through some hoops to make that happen. And if they're willing to just go get an ice cream with me right now, even though I'm supposed to spend every other weekend all weekend or 4 days a week or whatever it is they're supposed to, it's like if all they want to do with me is, go to a movie for now or whatever, then that's what we'll start with. And that they're willing to do that. And the willingness of the parent, that's always a green flag if they are willing
Yeah.
to do that. So,
Do you think that the kid is going to remember that a lot more than, oh, did I spend an absolute 50% time or the maximum court ordered time with mom or dad? Uh, do you feel that they would remember, hey, dad or mom was trying to work with me on my pace as opposed to trying to force it at theirs?
Yes, absolutely. And there's nothing that is, I think, a better bang for the buck, if you want to call it that, maybe a crass
Yeah.
term, but as far as investment in your relationship with your kid, than to just do the little things that they ask you to. A lot of times the things kids will ask aren't that big, you
Yeah.
know? And if you invest in saying like, "Oh, you asked me to do a thing and I did it," and or you wanted me to be flexible on this. And I know that that gets into other issues that are kind of settled or not settled between the adults and everything, whatever. But just from a pure being good to my kid thing, it's like if my kid's like, well, I'd like to do this, and I'm testing the waters to see if you care what I want. You always want
Hmm.
them to walk away from a conversation like that feeling, yes, I do. You do care what I want. Um,
Yeah, because I imagine that that's one of the worst things to be like, well, I guess I'll just do whatever I want because I mean, it's not like the situation's going to improve,
mhm.
you know?
Exactly, and we really shouldn't want. We should actively not want our kids to feel like a commodity that is being fought over,
Hmm.
if that makes any sense. Or
Yeah.
just I need them over here this many nights to change what I pay, or something like that. I know that's a factor, and people do look at that, but that should not be the primary reason. We should be
Yeah.
aware of what the kids need.
Well, and
I
especially if your kid's old enough, they know.
Yeah.
They
Hmm.
know that you're just there to you just want them there to reduce your child
Yeah.
support. That's they can see
Exactly,
it.
and that's they can see that, and also, being open to the needs of a child. That there, you do get kids who are either just this is how they feel, or in extreme, more extreme cases of, let's say, if someone has like a health condition or a neurodivergence or something where
Hmm.
they really identify with routine that makes them feel safe, and maybe they're like, hey, if I'm doing back and forth, but I need this many nights sleeping in this room because this is I feel better here. You need to evaluate that. You need to keep that in mind because, am
Yeah.
I going to force a child into something that is not just inconvenient, because we can learn to get used to things, but if it's unhealthy for them to break a routine in certain
Yeah.
ways, can we be willing to either take it slow or just say, this ain't going to look like what I wish it would look like, but I'm a parent and I have to make a decision that's good for my kid?
Absolutely. Um, I know we've talked a little bit about kind of the misconceptions that parents have about reunification therapy, but what do you think are some of the biggest ones that, you usually have to disabuse them of when they walk in?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one is that trying to win or trying to get sort of closure for something that already is over, if that makes sense. I think trying to look at it as the idea of what is functional becomes more important in this relationship with the other parent or the child, the child, yes, there's a lot more of that emotional repair because it's an ongoing relationship that you're hoping to have ongoing in the same way that you've always had, or repair and make it better than you've ever had. So
Yeah.
that's a little different. With the other parent, um, then you're really looking at functionality. You're not repairing the relationship that you used to have because you have a whole new relationship now. You're trying to repair and fix the relationship that is the current relationship. And I think sort of having that acceptance is sometimes difficult to get into that mindset. But if you do embrace the concept that actually this is a new relationship and it could be functional in a way, and also the thing that's hard to do can also become the selling point, which is to
Hmm.
say, let's pick the things that are still really, really difficult between the two of you and try to evaluate, is it possible that you might never have to talk to them about this again, and that you can go
Yeah.
and talk to someone else about it, or that you can go and, hey, this thing is a fight that we really shouldn't be having anymore because it's hurting our new relationship in a way that's making it not work.
Um, I know we've brushed up on kind of neutrality
Yeah.
a little bit. Um, Sometimes your kind of ongoing treatment reports they end up in court. How do you kind of avoid becoming aligned with one side or the other?
I mean, it is a tricky thing. I think that you see this with any time you do any kind of family or particularly couples counseling. One of the hard things, and one of the skills you develop is trying to keep a balance.
Hmm.
One thing is that having a really well-defined line of what is or isn't confidential. So if you have a parent, co-parenting kind of thing, you want
Yeah.
to have a pretty clear line of what is and isn't confidential, especially if you're having any individual meetings with them. That it's like this, that I'm not your therapist, and so you don't want to tell me things that you don't want to tell the other person. For example, that's the most simple boundary around
Yeah.
communication. There may be some, kind of extreme circumstances or things that but frankly, trying to get that across, and that's where ideally you can work with both in the same sessions. If not, I say, there's a sort of old rule of trying to make sure that if you are meeting individually, you're doing maybe the same amount is an example of that you are
Yeah.
gathering information. One of the things that is important is, as you put it, some of the treatment reports might wind up in court, and if it's court ordered, they almost definitely will be some feedback that they want from the therapist.
Yeah.
Um, Oh, I should say confidentiality with the child is very important if you're doing child family reconciliation. Those you can say, I'm not going to tell your parents what you tell me. By the way, just wanted to
Yeah.
make that clear.
Follow up to that.
Yeah.
How does the confidentiality work when it's like, hey, I'm the therapist for this kid. This kid is meeting with me, but say like the parent that they're trying to reunify with is the one paying.
Yes.
I'm meeting with their kid, but the parent is paying, or the other parent is paying,
Hmm.
or it's not something that's like, yeah, we both contribute equally to this. How do you
Right.
navigate those kinds of things?
Well, I think that the setup at the start is very important. It's like, here's the best situation for what we're going to do. Confidentiality. Payment's another one that, um, my experience has been that payment isn't a big neutrality breaker if you do it right. And what I mean by do it right is you get it set up, you say who's doing this, does everyone feel okay about who's doing this? If I find that it's a little harder if you have to chase down people every single time. So if it's like, hey,
Hmm.
we're each given 50%, we're going to put a card on file with the billing, and then you just run it every time. Or they say, yeah, one person is, or this person has insurance that covers this and the other doesn't. Then it's like you get that all ironed out first. And if everybody is happy enough with it that you don't really have to talk about it, it doesn't seem to get into the way very much. Now, frankly, and part of that is just the therapist's skill set of being ethical as well. Just the same as when you go into like the custody evaluation. I know some custody evaluators have rules over who they have to take 50-50, or they'll say whatever, but we're never going to talk about it again. So setting up some of those boundaries like right up front does help, because then you really aren't talking about it anymore. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you have a clear cut boundary, then it's very easy to go like, look, I get it. You're paying for this, but we all agreed that I was providing services
Yeah.
to this child or to this person. Like,
And it's funny because I'll also say if there's anything that's going to damage neutrality, it's often the person who comes along who is paying for it and so therefore wants special privileges. That's going to be more annoying than somebody who's not
you,
paying and
they kind of come
asking
up and they go,
questions.
hey, I'm paying your bills. Why are you not doing the things that I want?
Right.
It's like, that's not really how it works, you know?
One one thing too that helps is when you have had when you know that you're going to have to write something for the court, and if you've had experience doing that, you're really going to put observably reportable things like you would never. And so for me, I worked in like inpatient and residential units when I was sort of up and coming in mental health, and you
Hmm.
were very precise. I had a boss once who said, if you're going to put anything in a note about the shift you worked with these kids, he said, always ask yourself, would you be comfortable reading it out loud in a courtroom? So that was always drilled into my head. It's like, so if you think, I'm going to write this report and I'm thinking in terms of what am I actually seeing, which then goes back to your goal as a therapist is like, I'm not a detective. I'm not, a coach. And in this case, I might not even be anybody's individual therapist at all. Right. And so
Yeah.
thinking in terms of what am I going to report, that does get into that. Therefore, being honest in the reporting is also big, because if someone's coming in and one person is, let's say, being a jerk, It's like, does
Hmm.
that damage my neutrality? Potentially it could, because I'm like, oh, I got to call this person. They're going to be this session with them is going to be, they're going to want to talk about how when we were married, they did this, or they have this lifestyle that I don't agree with, or they have, well, every time I just know, and I get that little, oh, okay, here we go. This is going to be a harder one. The other person's
Yeah.
like, I got these 3 goals. They're the goals we said, and we're just going to go through them. You just know that's going to be a little easier. So you have that little tension or non-tension. I think that one of the things is to make sure internally that I'm paying attention to them and I'm looking observantly, but then also being honest with them and knowing that, hey, we probably need to, if this is the session that's more stressy and we're not getting anywhere, I need to be the professional who says, this isn't really working, what we're doing. And I am going, remember, I have to report what our sessions are going to be like. And I
Hmm.
don't want to write a report that just says that you weren't participating, or that I wasn't able
Hmm.
to, help you to move with this. So we need to shake up this somehow. And giving that, the same as if I'm working with someone who's coming for court ordered addiction therapy, and let's say, hey, you're doing this and this and this, which is getting in the way of therapy. I'm going to have to report that. Can we make it now so that my report will work better in and help you, because you're
Yeah.
participating and showing up and doing those kinds of things. So using that, I think, and interacting with the person to let them know, even to say, hey, our sessions aren't really doing what I think they should be doing. Then is that technically neutral or not neutral? I don't know. That's a philosophical discussion, but I am being honest with both, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
Have you ever felt pressure, like either subtly or directly, from a parent or an attorney to shape your findings?
hmm. That can happen. I've been pretty lucky with that mostly. You do get that occasionally. I usually will tell a person when I'm going to make a report, and oftentimes I'm either making it available to both parties, or in a case where it's maybe someone hires me and they're doing reunification with their kid or something, or maybe it
Hmm.
goes to their first, or in a criminal case, I'm always communicating with just one attorney, generally speaking, and
Yeah.
everything goes to them unless it's required to go straight to the court. But honestly, in most places, they get to see it first. And so I always tell them, you can ask. I don't mind if you ask if something, like, I've had that happen where an attorney will say, hey, you included this. It's not really pertinent. Does it have to be there? And it might be something really benign about, their
Yeah.
history of a career or something or other. And it's like, I can actually not include that. That's fine, because it
Yeah.
actually
He
doesn't
spent a
hurt,
week in Okinawa on a
or
business
something
trip,
like
and
that. Yeah.
it's like, okay,
And
that
that's
doesn't really matter.
exactly. They don't usually, and oftentimes it's more common for them to say, "Hey, could you focus on this? You did not state this in the letter that you wrote or the report you
Mhm.
wrote about, can you?" And then I will say, "You can ask, but I will always honestly tell you yes or no." So, for example, if they say, "Hey, you didn't put a diagnosis code with the diagnosis that you said, in this case, I think that would help." That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
But or you only put the code and you didn't put, I wouldn't do that. But if someone just
Yeah.
flubbed
It's like,
something,
hey,
yeah,
you misspelled this
expect
word. Is
everyone to
that,
know it.
did you
Yeah.
intend to do that, or kind of thing? Like,
Right.
yeah.
Everybody should know that F through 3.1 means major depressive, whatever. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, if they ask something like that, I can say yes. If they say, hey, can you say that they, you know, uh, can't hold a
Weren't.
job, and that they should
Yeah.
never be asked to have a job, and or something specific that I didn't find, then I will
Hmm.
say, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And if they're going to give me too much grief over it, I'm the court may have told you to get therapy. They didn't tell me I have to be the one to give it to you. So if we're really going to be
Yeah.
pushy, then you can take it or leave it. If it's really controlling or something. But I'm very open to that. I know in some cases that you can't really do that with a larger report or something, but
Yeah.
I'm just a guy. You can ask me and I'll tell you if I can or not.
Good. So let's jump back to substance abuse. How often do you find that, say, like, maybe there's like a child custody case going on, and one person says, well, oh, the mom is a big druggie, or the dad, he smokes a bunch of weed. They go back and forth and say, well, this person, does illegal substances all the time. They do it in front of the kids. How often do you find that those allegations are either like exaggerated or untrue, or I mean, if they are true?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's, I don't know. I haven't handle on kind of the percentages or anything, but one of the ways that I will approach that, if people are saying that, if I'm working with them to work through their communication issues as an individual, or if I'm working with the couple and they're trying to improve their communication, if that kind of stuff is coming up, I will encourage for, if this is what you want to pursue, there's an external process you want to go. So for example, if it's like my kid is telling me that the other parent is, using drugs in front of them, that's actually, well, number one, you should be contacting Child Protective Services if your child tells you that. If you told me that the child told you that, and I if the child tells me that, I'm a mandatory reporter and I would be required to contact and say that as well. If the parent is
Hmm.
telling me that their child said that, I would be my it's my place would be to facilitate to make sure that that happened. If it's like they told you, I think you should call, but then I might also have to call and just, hey, did this person call you? That,
Yeah.
and however you work that out. So if there's an external problem that is an allegation of something that is either criminal, or if it's something you think is important but is not established, it's one thing to come in and say, I think you smoke too much pot. And the other person says, like, well, I don't do it around the kid. It's none of your business. Okay, can we talk about that? And it's a communication issue. Or
Yeah.
is it they smoke too much pot and I think they should not see the kid ever? Then that's probably a lawyer discussion or an authorities discussion, kind of looking for
Yeah.
that, if that makes sense. If I'm working with both people and someone identifies to me that they're like, I think I'm smoking too much pot or whatever it is, and I
Yeah.
struggle to, avoid having my kid over, or I've done it when they're in the house, or that, as long as it's not something, abusive, and they're like, they identify it, then it's like, well, then we need to talk about what the options are for treatment. And that might
Yeah.
not be with me,
Why are you
or it might.
smoking so much pot?
Exactly. That's the thing of like that becomes then a treatment issue that we can
Yeah.
try to work out. And if it is non-collaborative and I'm working with you and them, you probably want to have a different therapist for that. Or if the person's telling me reunification, I'm trying to get along better with my kid, and I know I have these intoxicant use, and it really impacts things because I can't drink when they're there, but I really want to, and whatever. If we're doing that individually, then since I am experienced with that, we might work on that together and say that's part of your improving your parental thing, is going through that. So it's very important to have a line of what is external lawyer discussions and especially authorities discussions versus what is it going to be useful, and how do we talk about it in the session, if that is it. And it's something that you have to find that balance, because otherwise you're fighting battles that you have no power over in the room, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you seen somebody who has said, "Hey, I'm smoking too much pot or I'm doing too many drugs," uh, genuinely get change, like genuinely change and get the treatment that they need, and that actually affect their custody?
Oh,
Finally being
sure.
able to say, like,
Yeah.
"Hey, now I've gone to therapy. I don't have this problem very much anymore." So,
In fact, I've often been the one who, when I meet the person, it's because they're looking for someone who does addiction work, and they come to me and say, "Hey,
mhm.
I'm trying to do this for my kid, or I'm going through a custody thing, and they told me I need to get some of this." Or once again, if I'm working with a criminal, that oftentimes that's wrapped up in it too, even if someone has criminal charges. But I've seen people, ideally, obviously it's ideal if someone is doing it for their own reasons, but I've seen many people who started out treatment because they had to for some reason,
Mhm.
and it still can work. And so yeah, I do see that all the time where people do work through those things. And in fact, a relationship with their child can be a tremendously good incentive, especially if it's motivating for them. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if that's what it took for them to get back on the straight and narrow, I don't see how that's a problem. I
Sure.
mean, other than the fact that they'll have to deal with the problems that were caused while they did
Hmm.
that, but
Yeah.
I mean, all they can do is look up.
Yeah, absolutely. And that as someone who does work with addictions and things, I oftentimes will also see where people are kind of even proactively. And this is, one of the misnomers about addiction is people don't really think about this or realize that most people who get into a problematic level of intoxicant abuse, they have tried to stop and have had periods of sobriety almost always on their own at
Mhm.
times. times, even if they ultimately have fallen back into it or struggled. Most, vast majority of people, if they, I mean, they probably wouldn't be alive if they hadn't done that. So there is some motivation that most people have, even if it's fleeting or it hasn't worked or they're frustrated. And so, if we hit that right motivation, it does help quite a bit.
Yeah. So let's switch gears a little bit. And my next question is about being a court approved therapist. Is there like a formal designation, or is it more of kind of an informal thing? Maybe you help one person and then your name just gets brought up, and then you go, hey, this guy did good work, go to him.
You've got a couple different kinds of that. I do find that most of the time people just come in because they think you can help, and a lot of court orders do not seem to specify it has to be this kind of a person. Some do. Most commonly, I've seen where people will come in for, especially if it's relationship, post-divorce relationship, or parent-child reconciliation. They will sometimes say they want someone who's a member of the AFCC. It's one of the reasons I originally joined that organization is because I was doing a lot of this kind of work, and occasionally that was specifically. And I hadn't heard of it's the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts, and they have a lot of good information. I just did a long time ago. I didn't really know about them, and so when I looked up and looked into it and joined, mostly because a client had that on their thing, and I said, well, let me look into it because I know how to do the stuff, and then
Yeah.
so basically most of the time I've seen it's just somebody who has experience. If you're doing some kind of very specific work, then it helps to have a good relationship with the courts. Frankly, someone who does what I mostly do, I don't generally interact directly with the judges. I usually
Yeah.
interact with my clients and their lawyers. And so there's that. And then you do get some more specific. Occasionally, they'll say they want someone to be certified in one thing or another, but those are usually either association memberships or evidence of training or evidence that you've done it for a while. And that
Yeah.
can be, I've got these certifications, or it can be, here's just a resume of my experience, and they evaluate that. But that's what I see anyway. I'm interested to see what do you usually see when it's coming from the lawyer's perspective?
So I am just a legal assistant, but some of the stuff that I've seen are like safe harbor therapists, AFCC informed is one. Um, so sometimes they'll say like this person needs like a psychosexual kind of thing, so you
Mm-hmm.
know they need somebody who has the ability to diagnose what is going on with somebody, as opposed to just kind of counsel and heal. So those are just a couple of things that I have seen.
Yeah, I mean that's what I find. I find that, I mean, frankly, sometimes they don't seem to have a lot of oversight into that at
Hmm.
all, as far as that goes. Because sometimes I haven't had to provide any information, but usually when I have been asked for that, it's just some evidence that you kind of know what you're doing, either
Yeah, you're
training,
not just
experience, or
some
both.
dude off the street. And, they
Right.
said, "Hey, Jerry from the gas station, come
Yeah.
be a therapist for a little while. Let me bend your ear." You
Yes.
know. Um, what is something that a parent should do in the first 30 days of being ordered to go to co-parenting or reunification therapy to avoid sabotaging themselves?
Yeah. Well, one of the first things is, um, you should look at the court order, and if you have an attorney, make sure that you know from them exactly all the things, kind of what we just said. What is this person? What is the requirement that needs to be in place? That's going to be important. There's a lot of people who will get all the way to making an appointment and getting in, before, and they're like, even the first session, they're like, I don't really know exactly what I need, because you're in a
Mhm.
hurry to get there and get that scheduled. So first of all, I'd say that you need to know exactly what you need. And sometimes people are laden with court orders, and here you go, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do this, and it's like, the court authority or probation or whoever it is will say, you got that? And of course, we all know the right answer to that question. Yep. And then we
Yep,
walk
got
out
it.
and go, I don't know what to do. So nail that down. Make sure you know exactly what you need so that you can, communicate that, because you want to be able to communicate that at the time, not only of intake, but even at the time where you're making the appointment. And that's the next thing, is you want to figure out, who you're going to go see, and you want to start doing that. Definitely, you want to try to make an appointment within the first 30 days, because sometimes you get a hold of people, and you call one person who looks good, And then if they're out of town or they forget to call you back, or they do, but they're, booked out 60 days and you don't find that
Yeah.
out for 2 weeks, then so, look around, call a couple of people, and make sure that you have something scheduled. Make sure you know exactly what you need and you've made that clear. This might sound, funny, but also make sure that the payment arrangement, whatever that's going to be, is going to be something that's not going to be uh, burdensome to the point where you're going to have to cut it and try to change, because then you might have to explain to the court why you stopped going.
Yeah,
And
because you don't want to find the perfect therapist that fits all of the requirements, only to find out that the only requirement you can't actually meet is to pay pay for the
exactly.
services.
Yeah. Because once again, they are not court ordered to see you. You are court
Hmm.
ordered to see someone. And so, I mean, and they also can't be required by law to not operate their business, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
so, just make sure that you have all those practical things lined up. One important thing is that if this is going to require collaboration with a former partner,
Mhm.
you need to, once again, probably before you make that first appointment and go in, make sure that you have had some kind of collaboration to know, is this going to work for them, or are they just going to say no, I don't want to see this person? Make sure that you know that. Also, one thing to avoid is some people will try to go in and meet for the first time before they even tell the other person, because they kind of want to, poison the well or put
Hmm.
themselves in a favorable light. You want to try to avoid that, because it will not that will not be helpful to build bridges with the other person that you're trying to build bridges with. And also, to
Hmm.
be frank, a lot of the time, I don't think it's not really going to put you in a much better light with the therapist, because they know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Even if everything you're saying is true, it's something to be cautious of, because if someone comes in and they're like, "Yeah, I really wanted to meet you before I tell my ex that you exist, because you need to know what they're like," and it's like, okay, even if everything you're telling me is true, this isn't a really good faith beginning, and you're making my
Yeah.
job harder to help the other person want to collaborate with you if you're already trying to submarine them.
Yeah. And then, so one final question. What is a mistake you see parents make during court order therapy that kind of virtually guarantees their failure? What is the one thing that you see people do that you go, you're going to sink the ship?
Mm. I think when the biggest thing really is when you bring the win loss holding a grudge mentality,
Hmm.
when you are looking to solve the emotional part of your heartbreaking new chapter of life and just this whole hard thing, you need to solve and work on your emotional issues, and you need to work on your legal and practical issues, and they do touch each other, but you have to be very careful to know which is which. And so if I'm
Hmm.
going in to work on a very specific goal to increase my communication, I'm this is not going to be where I'm going to feel better or get a win or get someone to finally say, yeah, that other person sucks. So the win loss mentality and trying to solve all of your own emotional issues through court ordered collaborative therapy is not going to be the way. You have to. So the way to remedy that is to know which thing has which goal, and to say, if I need that kind of support, then I need a therapist who I'm working on that with, and then you need to kind of make sure that I'm looking for the right service, the right place.
Cool. Well, that was my last question. So, with
Awesome.
somebody who needs some uh, therapy services, how can they find you?
For sure. You can find me. I mean, I'm on a lot of the little like Psychology Today and places where people search for people, but I have a website. It's a good place to start. It's just dwighthurst.com. If you go to dwighthurst.com/court, then that goes right to the services that I do that are court ordered and things, or just you can buzz all around the site. I mean, I do, several things. So you can find that at my website, which is dwighthurst.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Great to
Yeah.
be with you.
Yeah.